That woman is drugging the children. But when the footage played, the entire room went silent, because the only thing she gave them was a story. And the truth it unlocked was far more terrifying. No one had ever asked what the children were grieving. If this story touches your heart, please consider subscribing. We're a small channel with a big mission to bring healing, hope, and humanity back into every home. One click means the world to us. The words sliced through the warm Charleston air like a cold blade, spoken not in concern, but accusation. And from that moment on, the Sullivan estate would never be the same again. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the Spanish moss hanging heavy from the oaks in the historic district of Charleston, South Carolina. The Sullivan residence, an antebellum estate of white columns and red brick, sat wrapped in the hush of wealth, silence, and ghosts. Inside the parlor, Andrew Sullivan stood with one hand resting against the fireplace mantel, eyes locked on Linda Cooper. His jaw tightened as her words echoed again in his ears. "That woman is drugging the children," she repeated. Linda, in her pressed Navy uniform and pearls, had served the Sullivan household for over 22 years, long enough to believe the house answered to her. She'd raised Andrew, watched his wife Caroline marry into the estate, and helped raise the twin girls, Chloe and Clara. But since Caroline's sudden death last spring, the house had grown colder, and the girls, they hadn't slept through a single night in months. Until Maya came. Andrew turned to the woman standing quietly by the doorway. Maya Brooks, the new nanny. At 32, she was elegant but modest, with warm brown skin, locks tied into a neat bun, and an unusual calmness in her voice. She arrived from Detroit only 2 weeks ago, and somehow the impossible happened. Chloe stopped screaming in her sleep. Clara started humming again. But now this. Andrew's voice was measured. "Linda, that's a serious accusation." "I know what I saw." Linda crossed her arms tightly. "Last night she took them into that nursery, turned off all the lights and shut the door for hours. No monitor, no movement. Then this morning, both girls woke up on time, calm, saying something about a star-filled forest." Maya stepped forward. "They said that?" A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "That's good. It means the visualization is working." "Visualization?" Linda snapped. "This isn't a meditation retreat. This is a grieving family. You're here to change diapers and follow house rules, not perform witchcraft." Maya didn't flinch. She gently reached into her satchel and pulled out a slim folder. "Mr. Sullivan," she said calmly, "if I may." Andrew motioned for her to continue. "I use a therapeutic method called attachment-based trauma storytelling," Maya explained. "The twins have unresolved grief from losing their mother. Their sleep regression, night terrors, and even Clara's compulsive hand-scratching are all classic trauma symptoms. Last night, I used somatic storytelling paired with sensory mapping and a grounding technique I adapted from pediatric clinics in Detroit." Linda's mouth fell open. "This isn't a hospital." "No," Maya agreed. "But the pain children carry doesn't stop at hospital walls. It follows them into their homes, their beds." Andrew stepped away from the fireplace and reached for the folder. Inside were annotated bedtime scripts, a therapy log, and a copy of a professional credential. Dr. Maya C. Brooks, PsyD, Pediatric Trauma and Behavioral Psychology. He looked up slowly. "You're a doctor?" "I was," Maya said quietly. "But sometimes the title gets in the way. Children need presence more than prestige." Linda scoffed. "That's convenient." Andrew raised a hand. "Linda, enough." But she wouldn't stop. Sir, for all we know, those papers are fake. You hired her based on a friend's recommendation from a community center, not through the agency. You didn't even run a background check. Maya looked directly at Andrew then. I expected resistance, she said, which is why I've already set up a camera in the nursery with your daughter's consent. It only records sound and thermal movement, no visuals, nothing invasive. But it's been logging every session. Would you like to hear last night's? Andrew hesitated. Maya pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and soon a soft recording began to play. Breathe in like the moon, her voice whispered through the speaker. Now out, like the sea. Clara's small voice giggled. The moon doesn't breathe. Then Chloe, I see Mama. She's smiling from the stars. There was a long pause. Andrew's breath caught. Then Maya's voice again, gentle and even. That's a beautiful thought. She's proud of how strong you've been. The room went silent when the audio ended. Andrew cleared his throat, deeply shaken. And you've been doing this every night? Maya nodded. Since the second night. The first, they needed to cry it out. And I needed to listen. Linda's face flushed, but she straightened her spine. This is all too much. You give them ideas, dreams, things that aren't real. But the pain is real, Maya replied. And so is the healing, if we let it in. Andrew stepped forward, holding the folder tighter. Maya, I want to hear the rest of your approach. Stay. Then he turned to Linda. You said you cared for this family, so start by trusting that what's working for my daughters might not look like what you're used to, but it's working. Linda opened her mouth, but no words came. The conversation ended with a quiet nod from Maya. As she stepped out of the room, she looked back and said gently, I'll bring the full week's recordings tomorrow, Mr. Sullivan, for transparency. That night, after the twins fell asleep, Andrew stood just outside their bedroom door, listening again to Maya's voice through the thin walls, weaving stories of stardust and safe spaces. Something shifted in him. His daughters were finally sleeping, but something deeper than sleep had started, something healing, unfamiliar, and quietly, breathtakingly good. The night Maya Brooks arrived at the Sullivan estate, Charleston was cloaked in a soft southern fog. Magnolia petals scattered across the porch like fallen stars, and the moon hung low above the marshes. But inside the nursery, there was no peace, only the echo of sorrow in the walls. Andrew stood at the top of the stairs, cradling his third cup of black coffee that evening, exhausted but afraid to close his eyes. Clara had already woken twice that night screaming, and Chloe had begun to hum to herself in the corner, a habit born of fear. The last nanny had lasted 4 days. Maya had arrived just before sunset, carrying one suitcase and a canvas bag of books. She wore a deep olive coat, her locks tied back, and a calmness that didn't match the desperation in the house. She hadn't said much during dinner, just observed. But when the twins refused to eat, refusing even to look at her, Maya had simply placed her hand over her own plate and whispered, No rush. I'll stay until they're ready. By 9:00 p.m., Clara had begun scratching her wrists again, her tiny fingernails leaving angry red marks, and Chloe had curled up under the bench near the window, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I understand if you want to leave, Andrew had said then, his voice resigned. But Maya had only smiled gently. They're not afraid of me. They're afraid of what silence means now. And with that, she had entered the nursery alone. The room was dim, filled with pale lavender light and the soft scent of chamomile. Maya took a seat on the rug between the girls' beds and slowly unzipped her canvas bag. Inside were a set of illustrated cards, a lavender-scented cloth, and a small audio box that played natural night sounds, crickets, wind, and gentle waves. The twins watched her from opposite ends of the room, unmoving. Maya didn't speak right away. She hummed instead, softly, a lullaby in French that her grandmother once sang in a Detroit kitchen. Then, when she felt their breath begin to slow, she spoke, not to them, but to the room itself. "Once upon a time," she began, "there were two brave sisters who had wandered into a forest no one else could see. This forest had trees that whispered secrets and a sky made entirely of stars." Clara blinked. Maya continued. "But these sisters were not lost. No, they were searching for someone. Someone they missed more than air. And the forest, knowing this pain, sent them a gift. A map made of memories." Chloe sat up slightly. "The first tree said, 'Remember her smile,' and the second said, 'Remember her song,' and the wind, it wrapped around them like a hug." Clara's bottom lip quivered. Maya took out a small folded blanket and laid it across both beds like a shared bridge. She placed her hand over her heart. "When your heart is too full, the stars can carry it. They know how to hold what we can't." For the first time, Chloe climbed into bed without protest. Maya dimmed the lights further and whispered, "Breathe in like the moon, now out like the sea." Clara followed. She didn't scratch her wrists again that night, and Chloe didn't hum. She just stared at the ceiling, eyes fluttering, lips softly mouthing something Maya couldn't hear. By 10 o'clock p.m., both girls were asleep. Maya stayed. She sat on the rug between their beds, back straight, eyes closed, hands on her knees, breathing in rhythm with them, for hours. Not as a therapist, not as a nanny, but as a presence. At 1:17 a.m., Andrew opened the nursery door slowly. The dim light painted Maya in gold shadow, her silhouette peaceful, the girls unmoving. He didn't speak. He just watched and wept. The next morning, Maya awoke to find both girls had drawn something. On construction paper, colored in the early morning light, were two nearly identical pictures. A woman under a sky full of stars. Her arms reached across both pages, connecting one to the other. At breakfast, Clara reached for the jam without flinching. Chloe asked if Maya could sit next to her. Andrew almost dropped his spoon. Later that day, he called Dr. Leonard Hughes, an old friend from medical school who now specialized in pediatric psychiatry. When Andrew described Maya's techniques, attachment-based visualization, somatic grounding, customized fairy tales, Dr. Hughes was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "She's not just good, Andrew. She's rare." That night, Maya tucked the girls in again. This time, they each picked a story card from her bag. Clara chose a cloud. Chloe picked a lantern. Maya smiled. "Then tonight's story is about two stars who held the light even in the dark." From the hallway, Andrew listened again. He still didn't understand how or why this worked. But for the first time since Caroline died, the Sullivan house felt like it might hold life again, not just survival. And when he finally went to bed, the quiet in the nursery was not silence born of fear. It was rest. True, merciful rest. The Charleston morning was unusually brisk for spring. The air smelled of sea salt and old brick, and the sun filtered gently through the tall windows of the Sullivan estate. In the breakfast room, Andrew stirred his coffee in silence while Chloe and Clara played under the magnolia tree just outside. Their laughter, unforced, bright, echoed through the air like music he hadn't heard in months. Inside, Maya Brooks stood at the sideboard, organizing papers. She hadn't said much that morning. Her movements were efficient, unhurried, but there was a quiet gravity about her, like she was preparing for something. Andrew noticed. "You're not just organizing their school papers, are you?" Maya met his gaze and gave a half smile. "No. I'd like to show you something if you're ready." He set his mug down. "I'm listening." She handed him a cream-colored folder, its cover embossed with her name and a seal from Johns Hopkins. Inside were charts, graphs, clinical observations, and detailed nightly logs, each dated and initialed. At the top of the first page it read, "Pediatric Trauma, a Working Behavioral Analysis, Case Study, Chloe and Clara Sullivan." Andrew blinked. "You've been documenting them like patients?" Maya nodded softly. "Not in a clinical sense, in a protective one. These girls are grieving, Andrew, deeply. But no one has ever given their pain structure. It's chaos trapped inside two tiny bodies. This," she tapped the folder, "is a roadmap, so we don't get lost with them." Andrew flipped through the pages. There were timelines. The onset of night terrors correlated with Caroline's death. Notes on Clara's tactile avoidance, Chloe's selective mutism. Photographs of their art, stick figures with rain clouds, suns with no faces. One diagram stopped him cold. It was a spiral, marked grief response loop, with indicators of when the twins had hit emotional triggers. Birthdays, the first rain after their mother's funeral, the scent of jasmine in the garden. "You made this in a week?" "I've studied them every hour I've been here. Not as a stranger, but as someone who knows what it's like to lose your North Star." Andrew looked up sharply. Maya's eyes held his, steady and warm. "I lost my mother to a stroke when I was 8, she said. She collapsed while folding laundry. One minute she was singing Motown, the next, she was just gone. I didn't sleep for 2 years. He felt something loosen in his chest. "Is that why you do this?" he asked. She nodded. "It's why I don't leave when things get hard." Before Andrew could respond, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Well, isn't that noble?" Linda Cooper said, appearing in the doorway with a tight smile. She was holding a silver tray she clearly didn't intend to serve. "A file? A resume wrapped in bedtime stories?" Maya didn't flinch. "It's a behavioral framework." Linda laughed. "You expect us to believe this is real? A doctorate from Johns Hopkins? That's convenient." Andrew started to intervene, but Maya raised a hand. "Actually," she said calmly, pulling out a flash drive from her pocket, "I assumed someone would question my background, so I came prepared." She walked over to the TV console and plugged in the drive. Moments later, a video loaded, an interview clip from a 2019 pediatric trauma symposium at Johns Hopkins Hospital. On screen, a younger Maya stood behind a podium, confidently discussing the impact of story-based therapy on pre-verbal trauma. The panel moderator said clearly, "Thank you, Dr. Brooks, for your pioneering work in the field." Andrew turned to Linda. "Satisfied?" But Linda wasn't done. "Then why are you here?" she snapped. "Why would a Harvard-trained pediatric psychologist take a nanny job in a private estate without disclosing her credentials? What's the real reason?" Maya's face grew still. And then, with a calmness that startled even Andrew, she said, "Because this house fired my brother." Silence. Andrew looked confused. "Your brother?" "Michael Brooks, environmental engineer. Hired into your Greenbuild division 2 years ago. Fired 6 months later for being a poor cultural fit. That was your wording." Andrew's brow furrowed. "I vaguely remember that name. I wasn't involved in that case directly. HR handled it." Well, Maya said, he never recovered. He was 2 weeks away from becoming a father. My niece was born while he was working double shifts at a warehouse in North Charleston. He lost his health insurance, couldn't afford therapy, and now battles chronic depression. All because someone in this house decided he didn't belong. Linda scoffed. What does that have to do with you playing doctor to the twins? Maya turned to her. Everything. She pulled another paper from her bag, an internal HR email, redacted but legible. It read, Michael Brooks demonstrates strong technical skill, but lacks the polish expected in Charleston's high-client environments. May be better suited for back-end roles in less visible teams. Sent by L. Cooper. Linda's face turned white. I found it in a data cache Michael kept, Maya said quietly. He never even saw this. But I did. Andrew took the paper, stunned. Linda, you made this call? I was only trying to maintain our standard, she stammered. No, Maya said softly. You were preserving a legacy of exclusion, and I'm here to break it. That night, Andrew sat alone in his study, folder open, documents spread like a quiet storm across his mahogany desk. The house had slept, but for the first time he realized healing wasn't just about Chloe and Clara. It had to begin with him. The Charleston morning was unusually brisk for spring. The air smelled of sea salt and old brick, and the sun filtered gently through the tall windows of the Sullivan estate. In the breakfast room, Andrew stirred his coffee in silence while Chloe and Clara played under the magnolia tree just outside. Their laughter, unforced, bright, echoed through the air like music he hadn't heard in months. Inside, Maya Brooks stood at the sideboard, organizing papers. She hadn't said much that morning. Her movements were efficient, unhurried, but there was a quiet gravity about her, like she was preparing for something. Andrew noticed. You're not just organizing their school papers, are you? Maya met his gaze and gave a half smile. No. I'd like to show you something, if you're ready. He set his mug down. I'm listening. She handed him a cream-colored folder, its cover embossed with her name and a seal from Johns Hopkins. Inside were charts, graphs, clinical observations, and detailed nightly logs, each dated and initialed. At the top of the first page it read, Pediatric Trauma, a Working Behavioral Analysis, Case Study, Chloe and Clara Sullivan. Andrew blinked. You've been documenting them like patients? Maya nodded softly. Not in a clinical sense, in a protective one. These girls are grieving, Andrew, deeply. But no one has ever given their pain structure. It's chaos trapped inside two tiny bodies. This, she tapped the folder, is a roadmap, so we don't get lost with them. Andrew flipped through the pages. There were timelines. The onset of night terrors correlated with Caroline's death. Notes on Clara's tactile avoidance, Chloe's selective mutism. Photographs of their art, stick figures with rain clouds, suns with no faces. One diagram stopped him cold. It was a spiral, marked grief response loop, with indicators of when the twins had hit emotional triggers. Birthdays, the first rain after their mother's funeral, the scent of jasmine in the garden. You made this in a week? I've studied them every hour I've been here, not as a stranger, but as someone who knows what it's like to lose your North Star. Andrew looked up sharply. Maya's eyes held his, steady and warm. I lost my mother to a stroke when I was 8, she said. She collapsed while folding laundry. One minute she was singing Motown, the next, she was just gone. I didn't sleep for 2 years. He felt something loosen in his chest. Is that why you do this? He asked. She nodded. It's why I don't leave when things get hard." Before Andrew could respond, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Well, isn't that noble?" Linda Cooper said, appearing in the doorway with a tight smile. She was holding a silver tray she clearly didn't intend to serve. A file? A resume wrapped in bedtime stories? Maya didn't flinch. "It's a behavioral framework." Linda laughed. "You expect us to believe this is real? A doctorate from Johns Hopkins? That's convenient." Andrew started to intervene, but Maya raised a hand. "Actually," she said calmly, pulling out a flash drive from her pocket, "I assumed someone would question my background, so I came prepared." She walked over to the TV console and plugged in the drive. Moments later, a video loaded, an interview clip from a 2019 pediatric trauma symposium at Johns Hopkins Hospital. On screen, a younger Maya stood behind a podium, confidently discussing the impact of story-based therapy on pre-verbal trauma. The panel moderator said clearly, "Thank you, Dr. Brooks, for your pioneering work in the field." Andrew turned to Linda. "Satisfied?" But Linda wasn't done. "Then why are you here?" she snapped. "Why would a Harvard-trained pediatric psychologist take a nanny job in a private estate without disclosing her credentials? What's the real reason?" Maya's face grew still. And then, with a calmness that startled even Andrew, she said, "Because this house fired my brother." Silence. Andrew looked confused. "Your brother?" "Michael Brooks, environmental engineer. Hired into your Greenbuild division 2 years ago. Fired 6 months later for being a poor cultural fit. That was your wording." Andrew's brow furrowed. "I vaguely remember that name. I wasn't involved in that case directly. HR handled it." "Well," Maya said, "he never recovered. He was 2 weeks away from becoming a father. My niece was born while he was working double shifts at a warehouse in North Charleston. He lost his health insurance, couldn't afford therapy, and now battles chronic depression. All because someone in this house decided he didn't belong." Linda scoffed. "What does that have to do with you playing doctor to the twins?" Maya turned to her. "Everything." She pulled another paper from her bag, an internal HR email, redacted but legible. It read, "Michael Brooks demonstrates strong technical skill, but lacks the polish expected in Charleston's high-client environments. May be better suited for back-end roles in less visible teams." Sent by L. Cooper. Linda's face turned white. "I found it in a data cache Michael kept," Maya said quietly. "He never even saw this, but I did." Andrew took the paper, stunned. "Linda, you made this call?" I was only trying to maintain our standard," she stammered. "No," Maya said softly. "You were preserving a legacy of exclusion, and I'm here to break it." That night, Andrew sat alone in his study, folder open, documents spread like a quiet storm across his mahogany desk. The house had slept. But for the first time he realized healing wasn't just about Chloe and Clara. It had to begin with him. The storm didn't break in Charleston that evening, but it brewed in the air. The sky above the Sullivan estate darkened early, heavy with spring humidity. But inside the house, thunder had already rolled, quiet and personal. Andrew sat in the library, the folder Maya had handed him still splayed open across the leather ottoman. He hadn't touched his bourbon. His hand trembled every time he reached for it. He remembered Michael Brooks now, a quiet man with a strong work ethic, referred by a technical partner up in Greenville, joined Sullivan Greenbuild as a junior systems engineer. He'd never caused trouble, but he'd never stayed long either. 6 months. Andrew rubbed his forehead. The report said poor cultural fit. At the time, he'd accepted HR's evaluation without a second thought. He was focused on scaling the company's new offshore modular unit. He trusted Linda. She had always protected the tone of the company, her phrase, not his. But now that tone felt like poison. That night, Maya didn't come down for dinner. She stayed with the twins, who had begun requesting her at bedtime as naturally as they'd once cried for their mother. Andrew, alone with his thoughts, opened the HR portal and typed in Michael Brooks's employee file. Access denied. He tried again. A message flashed across the screen. File archived. Contact admin. Andrew leaned back. A coldness spread across his chest. He reached for his phone and dialed the internal compliance officer. Angela, he said, voice low. I need the full HR report for Michael Brooks. I don't care if it's archived. Pull it. She hesitated. Sir, that's from over a year ago. I said pull it. The next morning, Maya came downstairs to find Andrew already seated in the solarium, sunlight warming the marble floors. His face was tired, but clearer somehow. I owe you an explanation, he said quietly. Maya nodded, but didn't speak. I found the full report. Michael was terminated after 3 minor infractions, none of them performance-related. Dress code, missed client introductions, and, this one hit me, tone misalignment in client meetings. That was the phrase used. Maya looked down. He wore his Detroit Lions jacket to a team lunch. Linda told him it wasn't elegant. Andrew swallowed hard. Why didn't he fight back? He had a baby on the way, Maya said. He needed his next job more than his last one. A long pause. Then Andrew asked, So why did you come here as a nanny, Maya? Why not bring this directly to my office? You had the credentials, the data. You could have walked into a courtroom. She gave him a quiet smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Because your office is protected, she said. But your daughters aren't. And I knew that if I showed up there, I'd be treated like an angry sibling with a grudge. But if I came here and earned your trust, if you saw what I could do for your children, maybe, just maybe, you'd be willing to see what your company had done to mine. Andrew sat back, stunned by the precision of her honesty. Maya continued, her voice softer now. This was never about revenge. It was about restoration. And it started with the twins, because grief recognizes grief. Andrew said nothing for a long time. Just the rustle of magnolia branches outside, the faint tap of Clara's laugh from the backyard. Then he said, You've given them something I never could. A way back. Maya met his gaze. Then give something back to someone else. That afternoon, Andrew drove to the local tech co-op near King Street. He asked for Michael Brooks. The woman behind the desk blinked. Mike's on the roof. Solar calibration. Andrew climbed 4 flights of stairs to find a man in a gray t-shirt, sleeves rolled up, sweat streaking down his temple as he adjusted a panel. Michael? The man turned. He was taller than Andrew remembered, leaner. But there was something wary in his eyes. Do I know you? He asked. Andrew held out a hand. Andrew Sullivan, CEO Sullivan Greenbuild. Michael didn't take the hand, just stared. I came to apologize, Andrew said, and to ask if we could talk. Michael folded his arms. You fired me for being too Detroit? Andrew smiled grimly. That's one way to put it. They sat on the rooftop edge, the sun beating down, the sound of church bells rising from below. I didn't fight it, Michael said after a while, because I didn't think I had a shot. I knew I didn't belong the day I showed up in Jordan's and your VP looked at my feet like they were on fire. Andrew sighed. We built something we thought was inclusive. Turns out we just built a mirror. Michael looked at him. And now? Now, Andrew said slowly, I want to build a window instead. By evening, Maya watched through the upstairs window as Andrew and Michael shook hands beneath the shadow of the oak. It wasn't victory. It was recognition. And in some places, that was more powerful. The smell of rain lingered in the air the next morning, though Charleston's sky had already returned to its soft southern blue. Magnolia blossoms shimmered with dew, and the Sullivan estate, for the first time in a long time, felt less like a museum of grief and more like a home waking from slumber. Maya stepped quietly into the nursery just after sunrise. She never knocked, not because she was careless, but because the twins had asked her not to. It feels more like a secret fort if you just walk in, Clara had whispered once, curling under her blanket. That morning, they were already awake. Maya found Chloe kneeling at the small art table, her fingers smudged with purple crayon. Clara was seated beside her, holding a glitter pen like a wand, tapping it against the page with deep concentration. You're up early, Maya said softly, crouching beside them. Chloe didn't look up. We had a dream. Clara nodded. You were there. Maya tilted her head. Tell me? Chloe pointed to the drawing. The paper was simple, lined sketchpad paper, but the image was anything but ordinary. It showed a woman, drawn in deep blue and black, sitting under a sky filled with stars. Her arms were outstretched, as if gathering constellations. Next to her were two small figures, holding hands, their heads tilted toward the sky. We named it Maya Under the Star Blanket, Clara said, with the gravity of a museum curator. Maya blinked. Can I keep it? Chloe looked up at her for the first time. It's for you. Beside it lay another drawing, this one rougher, drawn in strong red lines. It showed two open hands, cupped gently. Inside them were tiny stick figures curled into a ball, sleeping. Clara whispered, That one's called The Hands That Hold Our Dreams. Maya pressed her palm over her heart. And what about this one? She asked, picking up a third image. This one showed a figure floating in the sky, hair like petals, smiling down through clouds. Chloe's voice was soft. That's Mommy. Maya said nothing. She simply wrapped both girls in her arms, letting them sit there in the quiet morning with the scent of lavender oil and paper surrounding them. Downstairs, Andrew was already on the phone when his assistant interrupted. Sir, you have a call from the preschool. Miss Charlotte wants to speak with you directly. He blinked. Is something wrong? Actually, his assistant smiled. She said it's good news. At Charleston Bloom Preschool, the director's voice was still crackling with emotion. I don't know what changed, Mr. Sullivan, she said, but Chloe raised her hand today. Andrew sat up straighter. She spoke? She asked if she could be the peace monitor during story hour, and Clara offered her graham crackers to another child. No prompting, no teacher interference. There was a pause. I just thought you should know. It feels like something's opened in them. Andrew whispered, Thank you. He hung up slowly, the phone still pressed to his ear. That afternoon, Linda was polishing the silver in the dining room when she noticed Maya pinning the children's drawings on the corkboard near the nursery. Her lips tightened. Children's imaginations can be dangerous if left unchecked, she said, Voice clipped. Maya didn't look up. And yet, when nurtured, they heal the parts of us even medicine can't reach. Linda stepped forward, arms crossed. Don't you think it's unhealthy, the way they cling to you? Talk about stars and seeing their mother in the clouds? Maya finally turned. I don't tell them what to see, she said. I help them find language for what's already there. Linda scoffed. It's emotional manipulation. Is it manipulation? Maya asked calmly. To remind a grieving child that it's okay to imagine their mother watching over them? Or is it survival? Linda opened her mouth, but then froze. Because Maya held up a tablet and tapped play. The screen filled with soft light. The video showed Maya sitting cross-legged between the twins' beds. She was guiding them through a breathing exercise. Close your eyes, picture a star in your hand, she said on the recording. Clara giggled. It tickles. Then Chloe's voice. I see Mommy. Maya's voice on the video. And what does she look like? Chloe. She's not sad anymore. In the real world, Maya let the video end. Then she turned to Linda and said softly, This is not brainwashing. It's belonging. That evening, Andrew joined the twins in the nursery. It was the first time he'd been invited in during their nighttime ritual. The girls insisted he sit on the rug with Maya. Tonight's story, Maya said, is called The Lantern That Waited. She handed each of them a warm, palm-sized stone. Clara whispered, These are our anchors, right? Maya nodded. They help you know you're here now and safe. Then she began. Once, in a village with no name, 2 children wandered through a fog so thick they couldn't see each other. But each held a lantern, one given by their mother. And even though the fog was heavy, the light never went out. Andrew didn't hear the rest, because Chloe had leaned against his shoulder, her head nestling into his chest. She hadn't done that in months. And as Maya's voice wove through the nursery and the stars blinked on outside the window, something in him, something buried beneath guilt and boardrooms, broke wide open. He began to cry, and he didn't stop until the girls were asleep. The Monday after spring break brought with it a hush of anxiety to Charleston's business district. At Sullivan Greenbuild, polished glass and gleaming white stone reflected the light of a new season, but inside, something far more unsettling was beginning to stir. Andrew Sullivan arrived at headquarters just after 7 o'clock a.m., earlier than usual, earlier than expected. He wore no tie, carried no briefcase, and looked like a man not interested in optics, but in truth. He walked past the marble lobby where receptionists straightened in their chairs, past rows of cubicles that had grown used to his absence since Caroline's death, and straight into the 12th floor boardroom. Angela from compliance was already there. She had a folder. It was thick. Are you ready for this, Andrew? She asked gently, knowing the implications of what he'd asked her to do. He nodded. Pull everything. 3 hours later, Andrew sat in silence while the numbers unfolded around him like a slow-burning fire. 14 employees of color, 10 black, 3 Latino, 1 Southeast Asian, had been terminated within the last 3 years under a clause known internally as CFI, Cultural Fit Index. It was never on paper, never in offer letters, but it showed up again and again in exit memos, whispered hallway reviews, and quietly altered job descriptions. Can you explain this? Andrew asked Angela, pointing to a memo dated July 12th of last year. It cited an employee named Reggie Nguyen for being technically sharp but lacking executive polish. Angela hesitated. The term's subjective. It was created under the previous HR lead, Linda helped codify it. Andrew leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling. The rot wasn't accidental. It had been institutionalized. That night, Maya returned from the children's art exhibit to find Andrew standing in the garden. He was alone, his phone dimmed in his palm, expression carved from stone. "I saw the report," he said without turning around. "You were right." Maya didn't respond. They called it a fit score, a percentage chance a hire would blend with Charleston clients. The code was built into the recruitment platform. No one thought to check the algorithm. She finally stepped closer. "You did." "I should have seen it years ago," he said bitterly. "I let Linda and her team create a culture of curated sameness. I told myself it was brand integrity. Really, it was cowardice." Maya looked at him carefully. "Are you ready to change it?" Andrew turned. "I want to do more than change it. I want to tear it out by the root." The next morning, he called an emergency board meeting. Every executive, every regional director. No preamble, no excuses. Andrew stood at the head of the table, folder in hand. "I've ordered a third-party audit of our hiring and firing practices over the last 5 years," he said, voice clear and measured. "Effective immediately, all terminations and promotions will require equity compliance review." Murmurs rippled around the room. One VP frowned. "With respect, sir, that will slow down operations significantly." Andrew fixed him with a look. "Good. Maybe we've been moving too fast in the wrong direction." Linda was seated quietly at the end of the table, her pearl earrings still gleaming, her face unreadable. She said nothing. Yet. But that night, Maya noticed something strange. While cleaning out a drawer in the nursery craft room, she found a USB drive, one she didn't recognize. It had no label, no case, just a scratched silver shell. She plugged it into her laptop. At first, it seemed like a copy of HR records, but then she saw something far more chilling. A folder named Override Tapes. Inside were screenshots of deleted performance reviews. Some had been altered before deletion. One in particular stood out, Michael Brooks. Original note: "Shows promise, strong team player, excels in high-stress builds." Altered final note: "Culturally misaligned, consider transition." Her hands trembled. She checked the metadata. The documents had been accessed by Linda's administrative account, 3 days after Michael's last team presentation. The next morning, Maya walked into the kitchen and found Linda quietly sipping her tea. She placed the USB on the counter between them. "You erased people," Maya said quietly. "Not just files, people." Linda looked at it, then up at Maya. "They wouldn't have thrived here," she said simply. "They weren't given a chance," Maya replied. Linda's jaw clenched. "This house has a history. This company has a culture. And some people, like your brother, don't match." Maya stepped closer. "My brother is brilliant and decent. And if you can't see that, then it's you who doesn't belong in this house." Later that day, as Maya sat with Clara on the porch painting seashells, her phone buzzed. A message from Andrew. "She tried to erase records. Your USB saved everything. She's suspended. Meeting tonight." Clara looked up. "Why are your eyes shiny?" Maya blinked. "Sometimes even grown-ups cry when they feel safe." Clara nodded and placed a painted shell into Maya's lap. "You're the safest person I know." Maya kissed the top of her head. then turned toward the house. Justice wasn't a moment. It was a rhythm, and it had finally begun to play. Held at the historic Dewberry Hall downtown, it brought together the city's most prominent families, developers, museum patrons, and old Southern names spoken in rooms lined with oil paintings and polished silver. It was where legacies were polished, and sometimes destroyed. That evening, the Sullivan family was expected. It would be the twins' first public appearance since Caroline's death. The invitation had read, "Honoring the city's future through its children." Ironically fitting. Maya had hesitated to attend. She hated crowds, but Chloe and Clara had begged her to come.
"Your family,"
Chloe whispered, tugging Maya's hand.
"They need to see."
And so, Maya stood in front of the long mirror in the foyer of the Sullivan estate. Wearing a deep forest green dress Clara picked out from her mother's old closet. Her locks were pinned back, her earrings modest, and yet there was no mistaking her presence. She was no longer the nanny. She was a keeper of truth. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and old money. On the wall hung a projection of the evening's theme: heritage and hope. Andrew arrived flanked by the girls, both in matching lavender dresses, ribbons floating behind them like little promises. Maya walked just a few steps behind, her name not on the printed guest list, but very much present. Linda Cooper was already there. Suspension hadn't kept her away. She stood near the dessert table, arm looped through a local school trustee, laughing like nothing had changed. Andrew's eyes narrowed, but Maya touched his sleeve. "Wait." The night would reveal itself. And it didn't take long. Halfway through the evening, a microphone chirped. The MC, a local radio host, tapped his card. "Tonight," he announced, "we're proud to recognize the work of those nurturing Charleston's next generation, including longtime school advisor and community contributor, Ms. Linda Cooper." Applause. Linda stepped up in a deep burgundy dress, her smile gracious and tight. "I've always believed," she began, "that children thrive best when surrounded by order, elegance, and structure. We must guide them gently, but firmly, toward the kind of futures that suit them. Charleston has a culture, and it must be protected." Maya stood still. Her hands were clasped in front of her. The twins were coloring quietly in a corner nearby. Then a woman near the back raised her hand.
"I'm sorry,"
she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to carry.
"May I say something?"
All eyes turned. She was tall, with salt and pepper hair, dressed simply. Her accent held the music of Cuba. "I'm Elena Rivera," she said. "My son, Mateo, was denied entry to Charleston Bloom Preschool 2 years ago. I was told by an administrator that his name would confuse the donors. I didn't know who made that decision." Linda's face paled. "But now I do," Elena said. "It was you." Gasps rippled through the room. The MC stuttered. "Perhaps we can redirect." But Andrew stepped forward. "No," he said firmly. "Let her speak." Elena continued. "My son is fluent in 2 languages. He loves books. He sings to his baby sister at night, but we were told he didn't match the tone of this city." She turned to Maya. "And then I heard what this woman did for the Sullivan girls, and I realized Charleston doesn't need preservation. It needs transformation." Andrew reached for the microphone. "My company is investigating all historical hiring and admissions practices associated with our partnerships," he said. "That includes our influence over schools." Linda tried to interrupt. "Andrew, this is a private—" "No," he said. "This is public now." Then, slowly, Maya pulled a device from her bag. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, she said gently. She tapped her phone. A recording played through the ballroom speakers. Linda's voice echoed clearly. That woman? She doesn't belong here. People like her should stay in their part of town. Silence. Then murmurs. One woman clutched her pearls. Another man stood up and walked toward the exit. Linda shook her head. That was taken out of context. Andrew spoke, his voice cold as Charleston steel. No context makes that acceptable. Afterward, the event dissolved quickly. Sponsors quietly slipped out. The MC avoided eye contact. Maya remained seated near the girls as Andrew took questions from reporters at the entrance. Back inside, Linda stood alone near the flower arrangements, the petals drooping under stage lights. Maya approached. I didn't want to humiliate you, she said quietly. But I won't let you keep poisoning what these children are building. Linda looked up, and for the first time there was no defiance, only exhaustion. You don't understand this city, she said. Maya nodded. Maybe not. But I understand what it does to children when adults let their fears become policies. Then she turned and walked away. Chloe and Clara ran to her side, each taking a hand. From across the room, a trustee whispered to another, That's the woman who changed everything. Later that night, back at the Sullivan estate, Andrew stood in the kitchen pouring tea. His hands were steady, his voice low. She's done. Maya nodded. Are you okay? He asked. She smiled faintly. I didn't come to be liked. No, he said. You came to tell the truth. And tonight, it rang out. They stood in silence, listening to the soft laughter upstairs. Chloe and Clara had asked if they could sleep in the same bed. We want to dream together, Chloe had said. Maya turned toward the stairs, her voice barely above a whisper. Then let's give them something worth dreaming about. The morning after the gala, the front page of the Post and Courier carried a headline Charleston hadn't seen in decades. Charleston Gala disrupted by racial allegation, longtime advisor under fire. And beneath it, a photo that sent shivers through breakfast tables across the city. Linda Cooper mid-sentence, eyes wide, mouth open, as the now infamous audio played above her head. At the Sullivan estate, Maya sat on the back porch, sipping coffee from Caroline's old mug. The twins were still asleep, tangled in one another like the roots of the same dream. Andrew emerged from the study holding a folder, the contents crisp, official. He held it out to Maya. It's done. Maya scanned it. Formal termination paperwork, signed by the board. Linda Cooper, effective immediately, was stripped of all titles, severance withheld pending legal review. She won't go quietly, Maya said. She won't be allowed to return, Andrew replied. He sat beside her and added quietly, but that's only the beginning. That afternoon, Andrew stood before his senior leadership team. The room, usually a polished arena of polite nods and quarterly graphs, now buzzed with something else entirely: fear and change. Andrew didn't waste time. The board has voted to terminate Linda Cooper for breach of conduct, falsification of HR records, and systemic discrimination, he began. No one moved. He continued, We're also implementing a full restructuring of our HR policy framework. Starting today, all recruitment and promotion decisions will fall under an equity review panel. A hand went up. Sir, how will that affect speed? Our clients... Andrew raised his voice, not loud, but undeniable. Our clients will wait if it means we finally get this right. He turned to Maya, who stood at the back of the room. She'll be serving as external ethics advisor until our internal reform is complete. Her recommendations are binding. If anyone has a problem with that, this is the time to speak. Silence. Andrew nodded once. Then let's begin. Outside, under the crepe myrtle trees, Maya found herself face to face with someone she hadn't expected, Elena Rivera, the Cuban mother who had spoken at the gala.
I wanted to thank you,
Elena said, emotion trembling in her voice.
I didn't think I'd ever be heard.
Maya smiled.
It takes courage to speak. You didn't just help yourself, you helped everyone after you.
Elena handed her a slip of paper.
This is a list of parents. Some have stories like mine. Some are too afraid to share. They're asking if there's a way forward.
Maya looked at the names, 12, neatly written, with notes. Rejected for tone. Asked to anglicize name. Told to reapply next year. Maya folded the paper slowly. There will be a way now. Meanwhile, Linda packed her things from her home office. No one came to help her. No chauffeur arrived. She wrapped her pearl necklace in tissue paper with shaking hands. The framed photos of her and Caroline at debutante events, at ribbon cuttings for literacy programs, looked down at her like ghosts she no longer recognized. She sat in silence for a long time before dialing a number she hadn't called in years. A man picked up. Hello?
James,
she said, her voice hollow.
It's me.
A long pause. Then,
I saw the news. I made mistakes,
she whispered. He said nothing. She tried again.
I was trying to protect something.
What exactly? James asked softly.
Your name?
Or your version of order? She couldn't answer, because she wasn't sure anymore. At the Sullivan estate, Maya printed out the list Elena gave her and pinned it to her new workspace, an office Caroline once used, now converted into a family engagement room. The walls were covered in children's art. On the bookshelf were volumes of trauma therapy, social equity policy, and Maya's own leather-bound notebook. The first thing she did was call a meeting, with HR, the new equity panel, and 3 members of the board. On the screen behind her, she projected 4 policies. 1, blind hiring process, no names, photos, or addresses in initial review. 2, cultural competency interviews, mandatory for all team leads. 3, bias interruption training, quarterly and certified. 4, community hiring bench, outreach program to recruit from underserved neighborhoods. She turned to the room. These aren't optional. This isn't a phase. This is the floor, not the ceiling. One board member asked, "What about Linda's legacy?" Maya smiled gently. Legacies aren't built by silence. They're built by what we choose to change. That evening, the Sullivan girls made Maya a card. It was folded unevenly, glitter clumsily glued along the edges, and on the front was a drawing of Maya with a cape and a crown. Inside it read, "Thank you for saving our house. Love, Clara and Chloe." Maya blinked quickly. She didn't save the house. She helped tear down its walls, so something better could be built. Spring in Charleston arrived not with fanfare, but with quiet insistence. The azaleas around the Sullivan Greenbuild campus bloomed in brilliant blushes and coral, as if the earth itself was making a statement. Things buried could rise again, if given care. Inside the boardroom, that care was now official. Andrew stood at the head of the long mahogany table, but this time he wasn't giving orders. Michael Brooks was.
Clad in a tailored gray suit, not expensive but purposeful, Michael stood before the board with the ease of someone who knew the ground beneath him. His shoulders were squared, his tone steady. But there was something deeper in his presence now. He was no longer just Maya's brother. He was the new chief equity officer of Sullivan Greenbuild. And he had come with a plan.
"This is not a diversity initiative," Michael said, clicking to the first slide. "This is a structural correction to a cultural malfunction." He walked them through a 3-tier model. 1. Accountability frameworks. Every department must submit quarterly equity audits signed by team leads. 2. Community sourcing pipelines. Internship and mentorship tracks in partnership with local high schools, HBCUs, and vocational institutes. 3. Transparency dashboards. Real-time stats on hiring, retention, and promotion broken down by race, gender, and socioeconomic background, visible to the entire company. A CFO shifted uncomfortably. Some of those metrics could damage our reputation if they show imbalance. Michael didn't blink. Then the imbalance is the damage. The truth doesn't hurt companies. Hiding it does. At the back of the room, Maya watched her brother with quiet awe. He wasn't who he was when he left the company 2 years ago. He was more. That afternoon, a press release went live on the Sullivan Greenbuild website. From acknowledgement to action, Sullivan Greenbuild appoints first chief equity officer, announces systemic reform. Within 48 hours, the news was picked up by Bloomberg, then NPR. But the real impact wasn't national. It was personal. 18 former employees who had been quietly pushed out under the cultural fit doctrine received formal letters from the company. Inside each envelope was not only an apology, but a financial settlement. Some opened theirs with disbelief. Others wept. One wrote back simply, "It's not the money. It's the fact that someone finally said I mattered." 3 chose to return. 2 requested only that their letters be published anonymously, so their children could someday know what justice looked like in print. Maya, meanwhile, was working on a different blueprint. At the edge of Charleston's north end sat a patch of abandoned city land once marked for a condo complex. Instead, Andrew purchased it outright and handed it to Maya. "Do what you do best," he'd said. "Build something healing." She did, and she called it the Garden at Larkspur. It was part sensory playground, part therapy retreat, part community garden. Designed by children, painted with their handprints, and staffed by a rotating crew of social workers, volunteers, and, soon, Maya's new team. Because she had officially filed paperwork for her nonprofit, Bridgework. Its mission: to provide trauma-informed care, family advocacy, and restorative education tools for families displaced or rejected by traditional systems. She declined Andrew's offer for a full-time executive post. "I need to remain portable," she told him. "Pain doesn't sit still, neither should I." He understood, but he made her promise one thing. "You'll let me invest in it, not as a businessman, but as a father." She nodded, and they shook hands. Meanwhile, Chloe and Clara spent the weekends planting seeds in the new garden. They brought other children, quiet ones, unsure ones. Maya taught them to paint stories in color, to name the things they couldn't say aloud. And the art they created? It told of monsters tamed, of mothers remembered, of hands that held. One child, a boy named Caleb, drew a picture of Maya holding the sky open so the stars could peek through. He titled it, "The Woman Who Let the Light In." One afternoon, Maya returned to the Sullivan estate to pick up forgotten files and found a stack of letters waiting. They were from parents. One wrote, "You changed the way my daughter sees herself." Another, "We want to start something similar in New Orleans. Can you help?" But one stopped her heart. It read, "My son, Malik, was removed from Charleston Bloom 3 years ago. He believed it was his fault. When he saw your face on TV, he asked, 'Does this mean I can go back?'" Maya clutched the letter, then stood up slowly. The work wasn't done. It was only beginning. Later that evening, Andrew found Maya outside the nursery. The twins were painting stars again, this time in gold. "You ever going to slow down?" he asked. She smiled. "You ever going to stop asking?" They stood together under the soft dusk sky. "Michael told me you refused a salary for designing the garden," Andrew said. "I didn't need money," she replied. "I needed soil." He nodded, emotion rising in his throat. "Well," he said, voice quieter now, "you've given this city a new root system." Maya looked at him then. "No," she said. "We've only just started planting." The sky over Charleston that night was clear. Clearest it had been all spring. The stars were crisp against the indigo velvet of dusk, and from the Sullivan Estate rooftop terrace, the whole city seemed to hush in reverence. Chloe and Clara sat wrapped in a shared quilt, their cheeks flushed with excitement. Beside them, Maya gently adjusted the twin hoods on their fleece jackets. "Do you think we'll see one?" Clara whispered. "A shooting star?" Maya smiled, tilting her gaze upward. "I think we might. But even if we don't, the waiting can be its own kind of magic." Andrew stood at a respectful distance, watching. He hadn't joined the rooftop tradition before. This was the girls' private space with Maya. But tonight was different. It was Chloe and Clara's 5th birthday, and the theme they'd picked? The storyteller of the stars. Earlier that day, the Sullivan Estate had been transformed. No balloons, no magicians, no party planners, just blankets on the lawn, mason jars filled with firefly lights, and a group of children from Maya's new community center. Some were barefoot, some were quiet. All of them were invited. They painted constellations on paper plates, wrote wishes on index cards, and hung them on a string between oak trees. And when Maya asked what they wanted most in the world, the answers were small but sacred. A place I don't get sent home from. A school where my name is normal. Someone to pick me up who smiles. Chloe's wish? That Maya never leaves. Clara's? That we always tell the truth, even if it's scary. After cake, Andrew made a toast. It was short, but it landed. To the woman who didn't just help my daughters sleep, but taught them how to dream. Maya's eyes shimmered. She said nothing, just pressed her hand over her heart. Now, as they waited for the stars to move, Clara leaned into Maya's side. "Do you think Mommy sees us?" she asked. Maya hesitated, then answered with what she had come to know. "I think she's proud, because she knows you're becoming exactly who she hoped you'd be." Chloe pointed upward. "Look!" A streak of light blazed across the sky, arcing silently, then vanishing into the black. "Make a wish!" Clara gasped. The girls squeezed their eyes shut, tiny fists clenched. Maya didn't close her eyes. She just watched them, because her wish was already sitting right beside her. The next morning, as sunlight crept into the breakfast nook, Andrew handed Maya an envelope. She opened it slowly.
Inside was a check made out to bridge work, along with a note in his handwriting. For every child who wasn't seen, for every family who still waits, use this to build the bridge you dreamed of. Maya folded the check carefully, more moved by the gesture than the number. But Andrew wasn't finished. "There's more," he said. He placed a small velvet box beside her. Inside was a silver necklace, simple, elegant, shaped like a shooting star. On the back, engraved in delicate cursive, "Family is who stays in the dark and waits for light." Maya's breath caught. She looked up. "Andrew," he smiled. "You don't have to be their nanny. You don't have to be their therapist. But if you'd like..." Chloe and Clara appeared just then in matching pajamas, clutching a card. On it, they'd drawn a house, with 3 stick figures holding hands. The sign on the roof said, "Home." "Can we call you Aunt Maya?" Clara asked. Maya nodded, unable to speak. She pulled them both close. "Yes," she whispered. "Always." Later that afternoon, she received a phone call. The voice on the other end trembled. "Miss Brooks? I don't know if you remember me. I'm Janelle Carter. We met years ago at a trauma conference. I'm in New Orleans now. My son was just expelled for disruptive grief behavior. They said he talks to his grandmother in the classroom and refuses to read anything with sad endings. I don't know what to do." Maya listened, took notes, then said softly, "Let's begin again, at the beginning." That evening, Chloe and Clara stood barefoot in the garden. They planted 2 more seeds beside the others, pressing soil over the tiny bulbs like secrets. "What are these called again?" Chloe asked. Maya knelt beside them. "Shooting star flowers. They bloom at night." Clara giggled. "Just like us." Inside the house, Andrew prepared a simple dinner. Nothing extravagant, just roasted chicken, carrots from the garden, and sweet tea the way Caroline used to make it. At the table, the girls laughed. Andrew passed Maya a plate like it had always belonged to her. And for the first time since Caroline's passing, the house didn't feel like it was trying to remember something lost. It felt like it was embracing something found. Family. Not by blood, but by choice, by healing, by presence. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. Out of millions of choices out there, you chose to stay with us, and that truly means something. We tell stories like this not just to entertain, but to heal. For the children who were forgotten, for the hearts that went unheard, and for those still waiting to be seen. If you're still here, maybe you're one of them too. And for that, we thank you deeply and sincerely. Don't forget to subscribe if you believe the world needs more stories that listen. We'll see you in the next video. From us, to you, the one who still believes in the light.